So, my big fat church family. Let's start off with, hello, my name is Church. Alright? And I got a question, what is church to you? What is church to you? Because I think if we went through and asked everybody, like, what does church mean to you? We'll probably come up with a bunch of different answers. And some people give general answer, which is like, it's the body of believers. Others will say, like, church is the building that I go to. Some will say, church is my social structure. Or some will say it's the place I keep on dragging my kids every Sunday morning to. Alright? Church is my community. Church is where I find my strength. Church is where I go to balance my conscience against all the other activities I participate in life. Like, I do all these things and I feel like I need something to kind of balance them out, so I'll come to church once a week. Make sure that when I get to heaven, that whole balance, thing, it's tipping the right way. Or somebody says, like, church is where I meet God. Church is where my children learn the Bible. Church is where somebody's got to teach them the Bible, so I'll take them to church. All right, so if you ask, a lot of people have a lot of different ideas of like what church is. And what is church to you? And it's a good question for you to ask yourself, well, what is church to you? But not only is what is church to you a good question, but I want to ask another question is, how do you treat church? How do you treat church? Because how you treat church says something about its value to you. How you treat church says something about its value. When you buy your first car and you're driving it off the lot, how do you treat it? Stay away from the curbs. I don't want to scratch the rims and stuff like that. Fast forward 5 years later, all right, after you're done paying off the car, and new models have come out. How do you treat your car? It's a little bit different than the first day. All right, why? Because its value has gone down. Its value has gone down. All right? How do you interact with your family and how do you communicate with your family versus how do you communicate with friends? It's different. Why? Because family carries a certain value versus your friends. Not that they're not valuable, but there's a different value to it. So how you treat someone or something indicates its value. So the question is, well, how do we treat church? How do we treat church? Some people say, well, I treat church as something that, like, I just need to come take communion once a month. It's like my pit stop once a month. All right? Some people say, I would like to attend, or I like to attend, but I don't really want to get involved with church. It gets messy. Like, it's difficult. So I just like to come and be a part. I like the coffee hour. But beyond that, I don't want to really, get involved. Some people will treat church, with their great ideas. Like, I really think that this church needs to do more outreach to the community. And I'm going to keep on saying it over and over and over until finally they start to see it my way. All right? This is how we treat church. Or you're sitting there, if you've been sitting in the announcements for the last several weeks, you'd be like, gosh, why won't somebody respond to Father David's request for a new hospitality community coordinator? Over and over and over. Like, people here just don't step up to the plate. Everybody will treat church in a different way. Everybody treats church in a different way. And the way you individually treat church says something about how you value church. How you choose to treat it says something about how you value it. But the thing is, if we have all these different people and everybody is coming and treating church in a different way, what happens to church? If everybody is treating it in their own way, everybody sees it in their own light, and we have today maybe 60, 70 people here today, and everybody's treating church in a different way, thinks church is this or that or the next thing, what happens to church? Church becomes a confusing place to be. Church becomes a very confusing place to be. And church actually becomes a very difficult person to deal with. Church becomes a very difficult person to be with because church's identity is a bit confused because one person thinks it's this, one person thinks it's that, one person treats it this way, another person approaches it another way. So the identity of church is confused, and really what I'm getting us to ask is church really a person? Is church really a person? Can church have a confused identity? Personification. The attribution of a personal nature or human characteristic to something non-human, or the representation of an abstract quality in human form. All right? Am I just personifying church? Am I personifying church? I don't think I am, and I'm going to give you an example. All right? I'm going to assume that many people here have probably visited more than one church. Okay, have been to more than one church. First time you go to a church, what do you notice? You notice it's clean. You notice, it's a very beautiful church, iconstases and different things that make it ornate. You notice this church is really unorganized, or this church is very organized. You will notice this is a welcoming community. Or you might also notice I feel like I got a lot of weird looks when I was at church, today, and I didn't feel like I really belonged at church. That's first impressions that you can get from a church. But after some time of being at church, or being with church, you're going to get something a little bit deeper out of the relationship. You're going to be able to say this is a church that operates with me. This is a church that really benefits me and helps me in my life. This is a church that has a great deal of transparency. Or this is a church that functions with integrity, or is very loving or generous. This is a church that's very mission-oriented in what they do. Or this is a church that abuses its servants, that kind of takes them in and gets the most out of them and says, "Oh, come back next week." All right? Or this is a church that really talks down to people. All right? You start to get a feel from church. The more you interact with church, you get a feel for church, much like you would in any relationship. You can have a first impression of somebody, but the more you get closer to that individual, you will learn more about them. So are we just personifying church, or is church really a person? If the overwhelming majority of our conversations refer to church as having a personality or characteristics, then I think it says something about what church actually is. And I don't want to be the one to say it, but let's go to the Bible and let's look at Ephesians 5:25 through 27. All right? As we read it at the wedding yesterday, we read it at every wedding. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that she might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. St. Paul, in his description of the church, speaks of her as a person. As a person. Christ loved the church. Did Christ love a building? Christ didn't love a building. He didn't love inanimate objects. He loves people. The church has to be a person, or this completely breaks down. All right? So let's go a little bit further. Let's go Matthew 16:18, and I say also that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hate shall not prevail against it. This is what Jesus said in response to Peter answering the question by Jesus, which is, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter responded and said, "You are Christ, the Son of the living God." And the Lord said this, It says, I say to you, Peter, that on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. So now, as we're kind of challenging our understanding or idea of what church is, I want to ask a question. Where does the word church come from? And I'm going to say, careful, I'm begging you. Where does the word church come from? Huh? Okay, what's the Greek word of church? Huh? That's what we think it is. All right? I told you I was begging. All right? All right? We always want to say that church is ekklesia, all right? Which is a Greek word of church. Actually, the Greek word of church is kuriako, if I'm saying that correctly. I don't know. All right? But if we look at this word a little bit more, kuriako is referred to as the Lord's house, and really in the physical sense. Okay? And we're going to talk about how we got to this, okay? But the actual word church is not ekklesia. We commonly just say like, well, the original Greek word is ekklesia. True, okay, in that verse. But the word church is actually a different word. The word church is actually a different word. It's kuriakon, and means the Lord's house in a possessional idea. That this is the building of the Lord, and the Lord owns it. That's church, okay? But how did we get to this? We know, I'm going to tell you, the verse that I just quoted from Matthew, that's ekklesia. If you look at Greek translation, you're going to get ekklesia, but church is different. Okay? So let's kind of walk through a little bit of history, because history matters. History matters. If we look at the first 2 to 3 centuries, okay, were there actual churches? No. There weren't churches. You would lose your life if you were a Christian. There was unbelievable persecution of Christians in the first, second, and third centuries of history. Between Diocletian, which we read about, and the cynics are today, but all the other Roman emperors, they were persecuting Christians, and if you had any scent of being a Christian, you were at risk of losing your life. So you're going to tell me in an environment like that, there's going to be churches? No, there's no churches. There's no churches. I was doing some research. They said that the first church might have come up as late as 240 AD, okay? And that was like 2 houses that kind of like shared a living room or something like that. But church, in the sense that we know it, didn't exist in the first couple centuries, all right? Why? Because it was illegal to be a Christian until Emperor Constantine in 313 legalized Christianity. Okay? But just because he legalized Christianity doesn't mean that church is all of a sudden going to pop up. We still have a lot of society and years to go through before more formalized ideas and understanding of churches and communities and bodies of Christians that pray inside a church would actually come to be. Now, in parallel to that history of churches, the Bible was written in Greek. All right? But there are different dialects of Greek. There are different dialects of Greek. And as the Bible is kind of translated from one to the next and da-da-da-da-da, okay? It was going alongside that Christians were first meeting very scattered and then more organized into churches. And so it kind of made sense to call the church kuriako. The Greek word for that most directly translates from church. And so that made it into the Greek manuscripts. All right? Pop question. When did the Bible actually go into print?
16th century?
Yeah, 16th century, something like that, okay? I'll tell you this, it couldn't, I actually don't know the answer to that, it's not a fair question. But what I will say is that it could not have been before 1450 because the printing press wasn't invented until 1450 by Johannes Gutenberg, okay? And the only reason why I know that name is because I listen to a lot of kids, songs and educational songs from my church. It's the only reason why I know that, okay? I did not pay attention in history class growing up. All right, so in 1450, Johannes Gutenberg created the printing press, and it wasn't until after that that the Bible actually went into print several centuries later. But by that time, Christians had started to more formally gather and pray in churches, and so they started to call it Kyriakon in Greek, which means the Lord's house. He owns the house. All right? But when we look at this verse, all right, and we look at the original Greek text, we're going to get the word ecclesia. All right? So we got to understand, well, what is this word? Ecclesia is mentioned, or at least appears in the New Testament about 110 times. All right? It does not mean church in the same sense as a building or belonging, okay, or the Lord's possession. But rather, the ecclesia was a gathering or assembly of people who were unified around a belief. So there are two parts to an ecclesia. One, you needed people, and two, you needed a unified belief. So when our Lord was saying, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, or really, more correctly, I will build my ecclesia, they had the two components for an ecclesia, which was a gathering of people who were assembling together, unified around a specific belief, which was the belief in Jesus Christ, that he was the Son of God. All right? So they had an ecclesia. Though it was 12 ordaining men and Jesus Christ, and then those who followed, they had an ecclesia. But if we look at the word ecclesia, it's actually not a religious term. Ecclesia is not a religious term. It's actually a civil term. Meaning that, ecclesia most commonly was used to refer to a civil assembly of people. A civil assembly of people requires integration into a society, not a bubble. All right? So when we talk about ecclesia, at least in the context that Jesus was referring to, he was talking about people gathered together around a specific belief, a unified belief, in society. In society, not in a building, in society. When you watch the Jesus movies, okay, whichever one, you saw that Jesus and his disciples were walking around in society as an ecclesia. And what was happening? They were challenging the way the rest of the world was living. As a civil assembly, a group of people assembled under a unified belief. By using the word church, we have found the most perfect way to put Christians in a container. By using the word church, we found a way to put Christians in a container. We found that these are people who believe in certain things. Let's put them in a church that belongs to God. Don't just call it, this is where Christians go. But Jesus was pointing at something completely different. Jesus was pointing and building an ecclesia. A people to live in society and interact civilly with everybody else, but unified by their beliefs. It's much easier to be a Christian in a church than it is to be in an ecclesia. It's much easier to be a Christian in a church rather than a Christian who's part of an ecclesia. Church makes it easy. Why? Because if I say I believe in Jesus Christ, which one of you are going to disagree with me? None of you. Okay? I believe in the sacrament. Any disagreements? No? Okay, thanks. I don't support abortion. Any of you? Okay. I can go on and on. It's so much easier to be a Christian in a church because my beliefs aren't challenged. Okay? But Jesus wasn't calling us to be boxed up in a container. He was calling us to be a civil assembly of people in society, not to live in a vacuum. Not to live in a vacuum. So we have to look at this idea of what church was, or what church is, okay? And understand it through our Orthodox faith. Because our Orthodox faith and the way we live it out, all right, stakes a big claim. Okay, our Orthodox faith stakes a big claim that it's not a faith, but it's rather a way of life. And when we talk about a way of life, we're not talking about something that happens in isolation. We're talking about something that happens Everywhere you go is the way your life goes. Everywhere you are is the way you choose to live life. All of that is sacred. So, orthodoxy challenges us to live life without any barriers. Okay? To not think that, like, well, this is what happens in church and this is what happens in society. That's no way does our Orthodox faith claim that. I'm not saying that's not what we have done at times, but I don't think that's the correct way that our Orthodox faith challenges us to live. All right? When we talk about living a sacramental life, that involves all of us. That involves our entire being. The sacraments that we have, that we actively use, are the way that God's divine transformational energy comes into our life, and therefore causes a change, and we take that change with us everywhere we go. Not just to this place, or in this event, or during this service, but everywhere we go. We're called to change. One of the things that we do in this community is we constantly bring up the idea of a rule of life. And that's one of the ways that we look and say, like, okay, are we living as if all of life is sacred, or are we kind of, putting our lives in different compartments, okay? And the reason why this is important is because when we look at the greatest command that God gave us, Mark 12:30, it says, "And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." This is the first command. What part of that leaves any part of you left out? Okay? We got your heart, we got your soul, we got your mind, we got your strength. Physical aspect of you, the mental aspect of you, the spiritual aspect of you, and your soul. There's nothing left in a person after that. So we are called by God to love Him with the entirety of who we are. And not only are we called to love Him in the entirety of who we are, the second command is to love your neighbor as yourself. So when we do these things, what happens is we're on a collision course, an unavoidable collision course with society. We can't avoid society. If we are doing these first two commands, there's no avoidance of society. What I believe is going to conflict with what my counterpart in society believes. It's going to happen. If it's not happening, something's not right. Something's not right. Maybe we're just attending a church. But we should be part of an ecclesia. The claim of orthodoxy to the entirety of a person's life will always come into conflict with the American way of life. There's going to be conflicts found in the moral values that we ascribe to, the way we choose to live. There will be conflicts in the way we answer 4 key questions of our existence, which is, what's my origin, what's my purpose, what are my morals, and what's my destiny? Those 4 questions, which are necessary to be answered in order to have a conscious thought for your worldview, or a coherent explanation for your worldview, and the Christian worldview, is going to come into conflict with various other claims in society. This collision course is unavoidable. And Christ knew that, and He wasn't trying to avoid it. Christ knew that this collision course was going to happen, and He wasn't trying to avoid it. So, where are we now? Where are we now? I would say that we are the Coptic Orthodox Church in America. I think that we are the Coptic Orthodox Church in America. But I think our challenge is to be Orthodox Americans. Our challenge is to be Orthodox Americans. Our challenge is to live with the entirety of our belief system, but not in a vacuum. To live it in society. To live it civilly. To not be afraid that our beliefs, our morals, our values will set us apart. In what way did Jesus, when He walked on this earth, cover up His values or His morals? Not one way. He never hid them. He started a civil assembly over a belief on a certain way to live, a certain God to follow, a certain set of principles, a certain set of morals, a certain set of values, a certain set of exercises of how they express their faith. And he did not avoid colliding with society. The mission of the ecclesia is the mission of all. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. When you think of this commission, when you think like churches are commissioned to it, church in our sense, or our understanding, is an inanimate object. It can't decide to do this. But people can decide to do this. People can decide to go therefore and make disciples of all nations. It's only an action that a person can live out. And so, how do we see church? We need to challenge ourselves in the way we see this church community. It should not be something that we come to once a week. We need to be able to say, hello, my name is the ecclesia. I'm not a building. I'm not a parallel world to society. I don't live in a bubble separately from everybody else. And I'm also not one person. I can only be made up by a variety of people. I'm your neighbor in society, I'm your coworker, I'm your boss, I'm your co-student or friend. I see the same challenges you do. I struggle with the same temptations that you do. But I choose to live according to the teachings of Christ and adopt his values and morals for my own life when working through them. I choose to apply the morals and values to the same problems and temptations you face so that I can live his way and not anybody else's. I choose to stand up for my beliefs, which I know will differ from you, even to the point of contention and the possibility of the parting of ways between you and me, hopefully in a mutually respectful way. For I choose to see my life as being sacred and not divided into compartments with different values and beliefs. God called us to be an ecclesia. He called us to live civilly in society. He called us to believe in his purpose. Now, while we are not going to all of a sudden just stop using the word church, it's so ingrained in us. But we do need to challenge ourselves in the way we view church. It's not one thing that we come to once a week. But it's how we as a community function in society. And we will be different. We will not be accepted by all. We will have differences. But that's what it is to be the ecclesia. And that's okay. Because we're backed by God. We're backed by the belief in him. Our salvation is set. So, I'm going to finish up with one video that I think kind of summarizes things.
Lately, it seems that we're getting more and more confused about what a church actually is. So let's take some time to set the record straight. Church is not a building, though a building can be used by a church. Church is not a denomination, though a set of beliefs should be important to a church. Church is not about Sunday, though a church should not forsake meeting together. Church is not about one person or personality, though every church should be pastored. And church is not about size or growth, though every church is called to make disciples. So don't think of church as an address or a location, but rather think of church as mobile and on the move. Don't think of church as something built or planted, but rather think of church as something deployed. Don't think of church as where you are for an hour each week, but rather what you are every day of the week, because the church is the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. Feet shouldn't sit still. Hands shouldn't be idle. Feet go. Hands do. This is the church. Church isn't what you're sitting through right now, because you are the church. Now go and be the church.
first time I watched that, I was like, clearly this is not Orthodox because the church is 1 hour that you sit in every week. I was like, for sure not Orthodox. Anyway, you know, when I think of this idea and this topic, especially with our theme for the year, of being God's special people, you know, in order to be God's special people, like the verse implies that we are His possession. We are to be used by Him. We are to submit our wills to Him and let Him kind of lead us. And it's the only way that we are going to be special. It's the only way that we will really step into an ownership of our faith. And so we're challenged this year to be a family, to be God's special family, but to realize that it is not confined to these walls. We don't even own these walls. We rent them out every Sunday, okay? So, especially for us, we are challenged to be a church every day of the week. We're challenged to be God's civil assembly in our offices. I always think, I love the verse. It says, you are the salt of the earth. And if you are a good chef, you know that like when you sprinkle salt, you sprinkle it all around. Okay? You don't like sprinkle salt in like one little area, mix over here, and then think the salt is going to work. That's silly. You sprinkle the salt all around. That's what God was doing with the ecclesia. He sprinkled you in your office building, your classroom, and you know me here and you there, and you know all different places. He sprinkled us around. And He said, "You be salt. You be the ecclesia. You be the civil assembly." We're challenged to be that. And it's not going to happen organically because church is just easier. To think of church in such a one-dimensional way of like, this is where I go to. This is where I express my beliefs. That's easy. And we stink at it. It's easy and we're bad at it. Okay? That's a scary place to be. And what that really points to is that we're lacking in faith. We want to have faith, but faith is tangible. Faith is tangible to some extent. We're lacking in faith if this is the easiest place to express ourselves, express our beliefs, our values, and so on. So, that's all I gotta say. If anybody has any questions, we got time for questions.
I was wondering if, I agree that the church isn't just a group of people, but isn't the church also more than just us? Like it's more of like a transcendent reality that because of like the saints and the people that we don't see. So, I don't know, what's like the best definition you might give to the state of the church that includes all of that?
Can I wait till part 3 of the series?
Okay, sure.
Okay? Because that's a good question. Because the church is a rock. You know, the church transcends time. Because it is a belief. And you mentioned like, you know, the saints and the different theologians have gone like before us, like they all feed into the strength of the church. You know, and so we will talk about that in week 3. Which I don't have fully prepared, but we'll talk about that in week 3.
Okay, so in the classroom, for example, when I see kids, I know that they are Orthodox. You don't have to be Catholic, but I know that Orthodox. And other kids start to make fun of the church and Jesus, and these kids start to laugh with them. I don't know how to deal with that because I know that they go to church and everything, but I'm not sure about their faith.
What age are you kind of referring to?
High school, I teach high school.
You teach high school.
So
the question was, Reni's a teacher, and so she sees in her classroom some students who she knows are Orthodox students, but at times, correct me if I'm wrong, but at times they are made fun of by other students, or the topic being made fun of is the church, and she sees them kind of join in, you know, in the games.
And not just students, like I would be like at lunch and teachers, they start to like make fun of the church or Jesus or something like that, and I do not know how to react. Like I don't join, I'm upset, but I do not know how to like, you know, react because at this point I'm afraid that they're gonna like, you know, they're gonna yell at me or whatever. So I try to like sometimes like stop the conflict between me and them.
You know, I think I think it's really difficult to give you a specific answer for those because those are really kind of in the moment. But I would say like there's a couple things to wrestle with out of situations like that. A lot of times when we are first exposed to a topic being discussed where it's clearly going against like what I believe, okay? A lot of times I'm struggling to participate, in that conversation because I'm not sure what to say, okay? That's a light bulb for us that I got some homework to do, okay? And there's nothing wrong with it. We need to do our homework because we need to know how to respond, okay? When we look historically at our church, at how doctrine came to be, it's not that all our beliefs were written down. What happened? We were moving along, then somebody started to make a fuss, and then the church had to say, wait a second, what do we say about this? What do we believe about this? And then they go back and do their homework, and then they come out and they say, this is what we believe about it. So the church is not, you and the church, okay, and the body of believers, is not an uncommon territory when you face a situation like that. But we have to look at it and say like, hey, this is an opportunity for me to grow. For me to get clear on what are the issues being discussed here, and how can I participate in it, okay? Now, when we actually do that, and a lot of times it's not easy, it does take some time, you gotta read some books, all right? But when you do that, what happens is that you strengthen your faith. And in turn, the strengthening of your faith gives you the courage you need to begin to participate in the conversation. But even though we do all that, conversations are not going to go our way. They will go south. They will, we will be looked at as you conservatives, go back into your church building, okay? I think we got to be ready for that. I think we can't shy away from that. I'm not saying it's easy. I struggle with it all the time. People come up to me, dressed like this, and share some of the kookiest beliefs ever. And I'm just I don't even know where to begin, this conversation. and a lot of times I felt that's nice, see you later. I walk the other way because I don't know what to do. Because people believe a variety of different things, but I have to look at those situations and be I need to, if it's significant enough, I need to get clear on what the issues are. I need to challenge myself to grow in knowledge and understanding of my faith. And pray that God provides the words to say in those situations. And expect that it's always not going to be received.
But how the high school students would respond to their peers when they are making fun and we laugh with them, and that bothers me.
There's a lot of insecurity in the life of a high schooler. There's a lot of insecurity in the life of a high schooler, which is part of their emotional state, growing up. As well as when you couple that with, their knowledge of the church and knowledge of the faith and things like that, you couple those two together, that's a really difficult situation to be in as a high schooler. It's important to see like we're looking at a snapshot of their life, and that they have so much more life to give, to go through and to learn and things like that. As an adult, that's where you see I have a responsibility then to be a support. Ask yourself if one of those students came up and was oh, I know my teacher's an Orthodox, believer. Let me go and ask her, what should I do in that situation? You gotta prepare yourself. You gotta prepare yourself to be part of the civil assembly in this world. That's a good question.
Off the top of your head, do you think that there are good models I'm sure there are, but who would you say are some good models or stories of people in the Bible who were able to incorporate their faith with their occupation? Because I think that's one of the things that, like you said, it's easy to be a Christian in church. And I think also for a lot of us, because of our extended families and friends, it's also easy to be a Christian around them. Because at a certain point of your life, you start to surround yourself and you get to choose who to surround yourself with. But the hardest part, I think, for me is, I'm still a student, but the workplace, being, so.
Daniel. Off the top of my head, Daniel was chosen out of 120 governors to govern. and had a high position, did well at his work, moved up to be second to the king, but then those who hated him had the king, tricked the king into making a law that they only pray to his God for 30 days. And Daniel went and he continued to pray, to open up his windows, pray towards Jerusalem. Daniel knew that his prayer would come with a lot of consequences if found out, which it was. And consequences of his position, consequences of his life. But Daniel's faith carried him through. And when his faith carried him to a certain point, God went beyond that. So the Bible is full of these characters. We can look at Joseph. Huh? Nehemiah. Okay. Joseph, who was sold as a slave into Egypt, in the prisons, was doing what was morally right in the prisons, which had him move up bit by bit. Nehemiah, when he was as an exile, taken, wasn't put as cupbearer to the king immediately, but started at the lowest part of the palace, and through his work ethic and beliefs, moved up to be cupbearer, and that's when God can use him. Okay? So, in the workplace, is it easy? No. Do we run into those situations like, if I say something, I could lose my position? Absolutely. We can get there, and a lot of times we'll be challenged there. But no, that's where we really become the ecclesia, the civil assembly of God around us. Sarah?
I was just going to say that, one of the verses that caught my attention the last time we read Nehemiah 2 was in the first chapter of Nehemiah towards the end. It's talking about this opportunity that comes up when the king recognizes that he's sad or something going on. He says, and then I became dreadfully afraid. I really liked reading that because I felt like it dispels this kind of image that we have, that these were just, fearless people that were doing this. I mean, these are people, he became dreadfully afraid, prayed, he spoke. But that doesn't take away from the fact that, he had to overcome that, and that's what courage is, overcoming that dreadful fear. And being faithful to one is faithful to you.
We are challenged to be the civil assembly of God, not to be in a vacuum. Any other questions? Those are great questions. All right. Part 1, a big fat church family in the books. All right. Next week, you're in for another good one. I'm excited about this series. It's been exciting to prepare. We're going to talk about what it is to be a family. Okay? Another question? Stand up, pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. We thank you, Lord, that you have brought us here. That you are sharpening us, that you are challenging us not to hide and hold, but to walk as you walk in society. To not shy away from the confrontations that you face, knowing that you face them, and that you will give us the grace and the wisdom and the strength to face them. We ask you, Lord, that you will continually give us the strength and the courage to encourage one another and to be encouraged when we are in our workplaces or at school or in our communities, Lord, that we can stand up and share the way that you have called us to live, to not be ashamed, to not be afraid of it. Because, Lord, just as you have delivered those who have been in those situations before, you will deliver us according to your will. Not all situations will be great or easy, Lord, but you are refining our faith through it. And Lord, help us to see that as being so precious. The refining of our faith, the growth of our faith through the fire is so important. We ask you, Lord, that you would refine us as a body of believers, as the family of St. Barbara, St. Susanna. And truly we would be a civil part of this city. And you would reveal to us how to be a civil part of the city. truly share your love and your message with the city of Old. Through the intercessions of our saints who have reached you from the beginning, hear us as we cry out, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And Christ Jesus our Lord, and thine is the kingdom, power. Now, Lord God, the Father, the grace of His only begotten Son, our Lord God, Savior Jesus Christ, who gives us Holy Spirit, and with you all, the peace and love for you.